Yeah. Everybody in? Are we ready to go?
Yeah, I'm sure there's going to be some stragglers coming in. We only have
a few.
But it's
Wen Ying and Venerable Kong Chen.
Yeah, Toshito.
Toshita.
It's too early for you, all right?
Not really. We already
in
wake
winter.
up. We have morning service at 6. 1, 2, 3.
8?
6.
8 a.m.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have 2 more. 3 more.
Okay, we will start this 3-hour lecture this morning. Thus far, we have covered Buddhist movements in most of the countries, practically all the countries that we know about, except Thailand. So Thailand is supposed to be the last one that we will cover, but I will keep it to the last and try to cover other topics first. Because of time constraint, I will keep Thailand as a reserve. So if we have time, we will cover Thailand. Otherwise, we have to go to some other theoretical or doctrinal basis of or practical issues related to humanistic Buddhism or socially engaged Buddhism, not confined to any particular country, but the overall concept of humanistic Buddhism. As I have mentioned earlier, that humanistic Buddhism that started in China during the Republican period was later had later influenced the Buddhist movement in Vietnam. And in Vietnam, people who had come across the term of humanistic Buddhism noticed that the gist of humanistic Buddhism is to be socially engaged, or the emphasis of humanistic Buddhism when applied to our life is to be socially engaged. Therefore, was used most commonly used in Vietnam, and then people came the West. So yes, people engaged Buddhism.
Is it just me, or are we losing it?
And then today, actually,
really breaking up.
I don't know if you can hear me, but you're really breaking up. I don't know if it'd be worth trying to restart your router or your modem and try rejoining the room. It's pretty bad today.
He's muted.
Is it okay now?
Maybe we can try it. But if it stays this bad, it might be worth restarting.
Okay. Or if it's bad, you let me know to check or whatever, so that I know how to stop. Otherwise, I will keep going without realizing that it has stopped. Okay. I was saying um, the concept of socially engaged Buddhism actually is an offshoot from the concept of humanistic Buddhism. But today, a lot of scholars tend to differentiate or make a differentiation between socially engaged Buddhism and humanistic Buddhism. Meaning to say, socially engaged Buddhism is more inclined to a kind of Buddhist movement that is more inclined to take up social issues. Whereas humanistic Buddhism is more of a kind of Buddhist movement that takes on the social services, providing social services, like Tzu Chi is doing, providing welfare, emergency cares and things like that to victims of disasters, or building hospitals, or building schools and things like that. Now that is differentiated from the socially engaged Buddhism that we are talking nowadays. But in the West, the term socially engaged Buddhism is more popularly known. But we also notice that in the West nowadays, although the term socially engaged Buddhism is used, they are also very much inclined towards humanistic, meaning to say they actually do not take up much of social issues, but also take up issues like education and providing emphasis on mindfulness training and things like that. So today, we are coming to an important issue here, which has always been argued and debated. What is the doctrinal basis of socially engaged Buddhism?
Dado, you're not sharing your screen.
Okay.
That's better.
So today, okay, we are going to discuss an important topic that has always been debated, and that is what is the doctrinal basis of socially engaged Buddhism. Because there are some people who argue that Buddhists should concentrate on their own personal or spiritual development. Why should you use the label of Buddhism to get yourself involved in social changes? And therefore, we want to look at this issue today in a little bit more details. Now, what is socially engaged Buddhism? Socially engaged Buddhism is actually a contemporary movement of Buddhists, East and West, who actively engage with the problem of the world, social, political, economic, and environmental, on the basis of Buddhist ideas, values, and spirituality. This we can take it as like a normal definition. Means a contemporary Buddhist movement that takes up issues on social, political, economic, environmental, etc., based on Buddhist ideas, values, and spirituality. There are two well-known authors in USA who are well known for their study on socially engaged Buddhism. One is Sally B. King. Sally B. King, although it's King, but it's a woman, so Sally B. King. And the other one is Christopher Quinn. Although it's Quinn, but it's a man. Okay? So Sally B. King and Christopher Quinn are two foremost American experts on the subject. And they try to identify the philosophical and ethical thinking behind the movement and examine how the three principles such as karma, the Four Noble Truths, interdependence, non-harmfulness, and non-judgmentalism, etc., related to social engagement. So that's why I sent to ask you to, if possible, to get the articles written by them, so that you would have a better understanding of socially engaged Buddhism. Now, the background is many people believe that Buddhists focus exclusively on spiritual attainment. So Professor King and Christopher Quinn used to examine why and tell us why engaged Buddhists involve themselves with the problems of the world and how they reconcile, important keyword, how they reconcile this involvement with the Buddhist teaching of non-attachment from worldly things. On the one hand, we talk about non-attachment. On the other hand, we want to get ourselves engaged with these social issues. So, as argued by Professor King, engaged Buddhists point out that because, as she pointed out, that because the root cause of human suffering is in the mind and not the world, the pursuit of enlightenment does not require a turning away from the world. Working to reduce suffering in humans, living beings, and the planet is integral to spiritual practice and leads to selflessness and compassion. So she tried to point out to us that when we talk about social engagement, it is actually an integral part of our spiritual practice. And our spiritual practice must involve social service. So there are two sides of the same coin. So another way of defining a socially engaged Buddhism is a sustained on social action, grassroots empowerment, non-judgmentalism, and non-violence. Offers an inspiring example of how one might work for solutions to the trouble that threaten the peace and well-being of our planet and its people. Here, it says our socially engaged Buddhism is a social action expressing our non-judgmentalism and non-violence. So these are now considered as characteristics of socially engaged Buddhism. It must have the characteristics of compassion and non-violence. Okay, this one. Grassroots empowerment or mass participation. One. And then non-judgmentalism. We have to judge what is good and what is bad. So what is this non-judgmentalism that is mentioned here? To me, this non-judgmentalism actually means non-attachment. Non-attachment. So you are not attached to your own views. That's why it's called non-judgmentalism, but not exactly in the sense of not to be misunderstood as not judging. Okay. So having said all this, I conclude in a very simple way. Socially engaged Buddhism is a description of a modern Buddhist movement or contemporary Buddhist movement that cut across sects, Mahayana, Theravada, Vajrayana, East and West, which places great emphasis on social engagement. Okay, just to add, we say contemporary Buddhist movement. Most scholars agree that it refers to a kind of Buddhist movement that emerged in Asia during or immediately after the Second World War. For example, in Sri Lanka, around 1945, in in India around 1956, where there was a mass conversion, but earlier than that, there was also some kind of mass conversion. And then the anti-colonial movement in Myanmar, and also the anti-suppression of capitalism in Vietnam, and anti-war in Vietnam in the 1960s. So that was is a description, and this is actually not coordinated. They were not coordinated, but it's a form of it's a profile that we see during that period of time. And the important point to note that it does not say it originated from a single cause, say Tai Chi's teaching in China, but a general description of a series or a spectrum of movements which share similar pattern of social engagement. So I hope by now you would have a clear understanding of what is socially engaged Buddhism. But our main issue now is, what is this doctrinal basis? We must have some way of telling people that this is socially engaged Buddhism. We can't be just getting ourselves involved in social issues just because we are Buddhists, and then we say that is socially engaged Buddhism. Well, in that case, Christians also involved in social issues, Muslims also involved in social issues. So what is Buddhist about socially engaged Buddhism? So the question arises is, what makes socially engaged Buddhism Buddhist? A few scholars have deliberated on these issues, and I would like today to share with you the writing by Professor David Lloyd from USA, and the subsequent notes would be mostly his points. I would elaborate here and there, but actually it's from his argument. Professor David Lloyd, we had personal encounters with him in Malaysia also, because at one time he was a professor lecturing in Singapore, and we used to invite him over to Malaysia to give lectures on various aspects of Buddhism. And he was also at one time lecturing in Japan, so he was quite exposed to Japanese Buddhism, and being a professor in philosophy and religions, he's very well qualified to talk about these issues. So first, he talked about social issues, and he asked these questions: is it enough to say that we Buddhists are engaged in social issues because of our compassion? But then there's no need to think that we are involved in such activities because we are Buddhists. We do them because we are responding compassionately to the situation, as should anyone, Buddhist or otherwise, who is sensitive to what the situation calls for. So if you say just out of compassion, or you are doing this out of compassion, that is not a good enough reason to say that this is Buddhist. Okay? So compassion is not the monopoly of Buddhism. Okay? So it's not good enough. So what else? So the next question comes is, what most needs to be done, or what makes it so different of a socially engaged Buddhism? So this brings us to the issue of we call it band-aids versus cure, because as we handle social issues, then we realize that there are plenty of social issues. Maybe in Augusta itself, you have many issues. Maybe you have what you call homeless people, or you have people who are suffering from COVID-19 now. So there are a lot of social issues. And so the question arises, where shall we focus? We can't be taking up all the issues just because we are Buddhists. So we will have to take up certain issues. And when we take up certain issues, and that's not good enough, because sooner or later, we would like to go deeper into it. We begin to distinguish between a particular problem and the larger social context it is part of or cause of. So, for example, if you talk about homelessness, this is a social issue. So, if you talk about helping those people with homelessness by building another home for them, or raise some fund, or provide them with food, or send them food or blankets in winters, well, but that's good, and we are not denying that. Okay, but after some time, you would ask the question in the bigger social context, why this problem is there? If I have been offering help year in and year out, day in and day out, and that problem still persists, you want to know what is the cause. So now you are going to a larger context. Okay, so when you look at the larger context, then you try to diagnose the problem and treat the problem rather than the band-aids. So instead of just helping out the homeless people, you would like to find out what causes homelessness and how would you propose to the authorities, or how would you as an organization would like to deal with this kind of a problem. So when you look at all these social issues, there are many other examples. For example, poverty. Many Buddhist organizations are involved in offering financial aid to people who are in poverty. But after some time, we would like to ask the question: what are the causes of the poverty? It's bad governance, because of corruption, because of injustice, and sooner or later you would like to go and deal with these kind of problems rather than just the band-aid star. If there are some poor people here, I offer some food here. That's all. Okay. Then similarly, you have healthcare, and then you have war. Okay. People are injured in the war or die in the war. Then you would like to offer some care, but you would like to also ask the question: why war, and how can war be stopped? So then we begin to ponder over these kind of social issues. So we need to ask, what is that source? What is the social disease that needs to be alleviated and so far as possible cured? And then we want to ask this question: what does Buddhism say or imply about this kind of social problem or disease? This is where now you want to ask what Buddhism says about this. So when we say what Buddhism says about social issues, unfortunately, traditional Buddhism has little to say about social concern. And even if it did, it was meant for the agricultural society at that time. Very much different from the pre-modern society we are in today. So when we try to look at the traditional Buddhism and look at how it dealt with the social problems, we would normally be rather disappointed. And there may be a few reasons why it is so, because in the traditional Buddhism, the Buddhist path offers an individual alternative to the world of samsara, not a political solution to the world of samsara. So we cannot deny the fact that the Buddha was more concerned with individual salvation and therefore offer a path for the individual to get out of the samsara, and not a political solution to the social issues at that time. And also we need to also understand that in traditional Buddhism, the background of Buddhism is such that the propagation of the Dhamma must be in such a way not to challenge the rulers kings of that time, because any social problems in the ancient societies would be handled by the kings, not for any religious person or other civilians to take up those issues. And we also need to know that Not that in the traditional Buddhism, the Buddha or his disciples did not want to take up social issues, but rather the social issues in the past, their impact is very much less than what we have today. For example, nowadays, if we consume something, we throw plastics into the drain, the plastic would go into the drain and eventually ended up in the sea and caused so much social impact. Whereas in the past, well, a person might eat the food from his banana leaf, and that banana leaf is thrown into the drain, that banana leaf eventually decay. So the social impact in the past had always been much less than what we had today. So when we try to look for a direct answer from traditional Buddhism, probably we will be disappointed. However, Professor David Lloyd argued that this perspective of not taking up social issues as happened in the traditional Buddhism cannot be true now for Buddhism today. Now, why it cannot be true now for Buddhism today is because whereas Buddhist institutions and teachings in traditional society limited itself to individual salvation and not to question social orders in the face of rulers, kings, and emperors, modern democracy and respect for human rights offer new opportunities for understanding the broader implications of Buddhist teachings. Modern democracy, the respect for human rights, these are all new values, now offer us new opportunities for us to understand the Buddhist teachings in a broader perspective. For us, it is true that the post-modern world is quite different from the Buddha's time. Buddhism's basic principle remains just as true as when the Buddha taught them. If we try to find direct answers to our social problems in ASEAN Buddhist teachings, we would be disappointed, as I mentioned earlier, because those teachings were intended for the people living in a very different times and places. But if we ask what basic Buddhist principles imply for people of the present day, we may find that a Buddhist perspective has something important to offer. Therefore, from this perspective, we know that in the modern days, we may be able to find some answer from the Buddhist perspective. For example, the three roots of greed, hatred, and delusion, lobha, dosa, moha, remain the same. But today's incredibly powerful technologies mean that they now operate and interact on a scale that is vastly larger than during the Buddha's day. And for Buddhists to ignore this reality while devoting ourselves wholly to our own liberation is to ignore our responsibility to the world. The David Lloyd goes on to say, enlightenment, after all, includes realizing that we are part of the world, not dwell with it. And today, our world needs all the help it can get. So, when you look at the three roots of greed, hatred, and delusion, later on we may expand further to let us understand how greed, hatred, and delusion has taken on a scale never seen before in history. And if we ignore this reality, while devoting ourselves wholly to our own liberation, is to ignore our responsibility. And in fact, David Lloyd like to use the word ignorance, means ignore. You may know, but you ignore. Okay. So now to deal with these social issues, now we are going deeper into the doctrinal basis of socially engaged Buddhism. So those slides that I have highlighted in blue are important slides, so that you can focus better on it. Non-duality of personal and social practice. First of all, we need to understand we are not dual. We ask the question of what is the relationship between our Buddhist practice and our social engagement. This is the question that I posed right at the beginning. what is the relationship between our Buddhist practice and our social engagement? And to answer these questions, there are different aspects of the same, they are actually different aspects of the same developmental process. To think otherwise, viewing them as distinct issues, is an illusion of the thought that we are trying to overcome in our spiritual practice, showing we are not yet mature enough in our spiritual understanding. Now, this is a very strong word, but it also drives home the point that our personal practice and our social engagement are actually part and parcel of the same process. They are not two different processes, part and parcel of the same processes. And if we cannot get out of these illusions, we are actually spiritually not advanced enough. Right? By the time we are spiritually advanced enough, we will be able to see that they are the same. Believing and acting as if they are separate, and that is trying to liberate or awaken ourselves, take care of itself, is another instance of the subject-object self-other duality. This duality expresses the fundamental ignorance that needs to be overcome. Fundamental ignorance here actually means the delusion or the moha that we need to overcome. Now, this is yesterday, Venerable Chiru mentioned to you at the beginning of this lecture about dichotomy. Dichotomy is another word for duality. Okay, yes or no, subject, object, ourselves, and the others. This kind of dichotomy. And we now tend to say, okay, this is my spiritual practice, that is social issue. So again, it's another kind of dichotomy. And this actually is a moha, it's a kind of delusion or ignorance. So in other words, our Buddhist practice and our social engagement needs each other. Without responsible engagement by people committed to spiritual practice, the world situation will continue to deteriorate, causing more people to suffer along with the rest of the biosphere. So without responsible engagement by people committed to spiritual practice, the world will get worse and worse. And then, actually, furthermore, our own spiritual practice is negatively affected by a self-defeating self-preoccupation. Self-centered practice reinforces one's sense of self, even as one works to overcome it. So, if you are engaged in so-called or preoccupied with so-called self-salvation practices and ignoring the rest of the world, you are actually reinforcing yourself, the self, while you are trying to practice to the extent of getting to the extent of no self, you are actually reinforcing yourself. We may think that we are spiritually transformed, but if the changes that happen reinforce, since we are here, by the way, that is how I notice many meditation people actually fall into this trap. Many meditation people, I do not know in other countries, but probably in the East here, they are only focused on their own meditation to the extent that their self, in fact, become bigger and bigger before meditation. So watch out. Now, without a spiritual practice, social engagement tend to burn us up because emotionally stressful. And this is from the other perspective. If we want to be socially engaged, we want to engage ourselves in social issues, but without a spiritual practice, we tend to burn out. Because to engage in social issues is a very stressful and exhausting exercise. Like you heard from my lecture on the Venerable Zhao Hui, for her to take up those issues, for example, wanting not to go, or to take up issues on gender inclusiveness, or to take up issues on the Karudama, she was actually put under tremendous amount of stress. And if she was not a Buddhist practitioner, I think she might not be able to withstand this. And if you look around today, many political leaders were spiritually very strong, that they were able to withstand the pressure and the stress put heap upon them. For example, Nelson Mandela, he was put in jail for almost 27 years. Mind you, 27 years. But he could still leave the prison in a way that impressed many people. He said that if I leave the prison and I carry my hatred along, then I am still in prison. So in a way, he was quite spiritually advanced. So you need a lot of spiritual strength to take on social issues. And more importantly, without a spiritual dimension to our lives, we cannot really a very high order. When we say that, well, if you don't have a spiritual dimensions to your life, and then you take up all these social issues, then you don't really understand the basic problem. Well, to illustrate this point, perhaps we give example that would then you can understand better. For example, during the French Revolution, they were wanted kings and violence that they usually beheaded so many people. So it came back again. So you notice that there is no humanity and no spirituality in the exercise. So the basic problem would, that had later translated to Leninism or Maoism, they also inflicted a lot of suffering, even though right from the beginning, Marxism's concept was to remove the caste, the economic caste. But then, without understanding the spiritual issues behind this, then the caste struggle became a violent struggle that eventually caused much more suffering to many people. You look at the Khmer Rouge. The Khmer Rouge also wanted to build a country of themselves based on their communist ideology. But the first thing they did was to slaughter all those who opposed them. It seems more than 1 million people were slaughtered by their own countrymen. Likewise, you look at terrorism. People resorted to terrorism in order to champion their cause and inflicting so much suffering to other people, but that would not solve their problem and would not solve other people's problem. So, when we look at this non-duality of personal and social practice, we are still under this heading. We notice that actually Buddhist principles whose social implications are just as significant. There are many other Buddhist principles. So the first thing we want to talk about, the first principle we want to talk about is dukkha and the sense of self. Social problems today arises actually mainly from the deluded sense of self. We talk about my religion, my race, my country. That is where the cause of the conflict is. And this is extended now to a mass of people. We call it ego. Instead of ego, which is referring to your own self, we also have a group together. We call it ego. So ego means my country, my religion, my race. This is all ego. But if you talk I or me, there's ego. Okay. And ironically, actually, religious institutions reinforce this sense of self. Many conflicts today, some of them I already shared with you earlier, because everybody tries to reinforce our sense of self. And now we have nation states, we have large national corporations, we have military and industrial complexes. They institutionalize further this collective sense of self, okay? Especially large corporations. So large corporations try to make itself larger and larger, try to eliminate the competitors and reinforce its own sense of self. So now the interesting part is Bodhisattva vow to help all sentient beings, not just Buddhists. What we need is this selfless universalism. We now have to think about not just the self, but the selfless. The principle works better to provide the question, do we see a dynamic operating, not to provide a monolithic answer. Now, you will look at all these things, and you tend to ask me, or ask David, then what is the answer? Well, he said, actually, here is not to provide the answer, but to provide the questions. When you see the question, or to be able to comprehend this ego concept, then we will be able to understand the issues better. Now we look at the three evil rules. They actually keep on reinforcing each other. When you like something, when you greet something, and if somebody obstructs you from getting it, then you hate that somebody, dosa. Okay? And then you have the you reinforce the idea that he and me and or I and the rest. So we have this concept of delusion, and so they reinforce each other. And we need to remedy loba, dosa, and moha with generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom. So now the question is, just now we talked about loba, dosa, moha, and we need to reinforce with generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom. The question is, does it work structurally and collectively in the modern institutions? Today's institutions, we have institutionalized greed. So, for example, if you work in a big corporation, that big corporations has this KPIs or key performance index. It has its own profit target, and if you are a CEO, you have to work for that. And then you have makes you self-cultivation. But if your corporation wants you to, you talk about self-cultivation, asks you to practice generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom. But if your institution actually asks you to get more, persuade people to spend more, so that we profit more, you are in a big dilemma. Similarly, institutionalized ill will. We have many ways of institutionalized ill will. For example, if we don't like to see many homeless one way, and actually of hatred for you, you find them a nuisance, and because you find that you and them are different, or you conceptualize that they are different from you, and you don't like to see them, therefore you want to get them. Another problem is the people start new markets by putting countries into conflicts or people into conflict so that
Dado, you're cutting out. I don't know if you can hear me or not, but yeah, yeah.
can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can shall we continue? Okay, just now we cut off.
Okay.
Okay, now. Okay, we were talking about the three evil rules: institutionalized greed, institutionalized evil, and delusions. We talk about nationalism. All these are concepts put us. Just now I was talking about militarism, military and industry complexes today create conflicts between countries, conflicts between people, so that these people fight and they could sell more weapons, they make more money. And then the delusions of the concept of nationalism, or we Homo sapiens versus the rest of the world, and then this tititainment, is a new word now, the teeth that we used to suck when we were young, when we were babies. Well, we provide this kind of entertainment to numb our senses, to make us overly sensuous, you know. And then we also more public opinions, and we are even ignorant of our own history, geography, and science. So these are all illusional problems, which are institutionalized. Now, in realizing the nature of this institutional poison is just as spiritual and just as important as any personal realization we may have as a result of our Buddhist practice. So our Buddhist practice, we must realize this kind of institutional poison just as much as we realize our own internal poison in our own mind. In fact, any individual awakening we may have on our meditation cushions remain just as incomplete until it is supplemented by a social awakening. In both cases, what is needed is a greater awareness that goes beyond the limitations of ego and vigo consciousness. Usually we think of expanded consciousness in individual terms, but today we must penetrate through the veil of social illusion, attain greater understanding of social, economic, and ecological realities. So we talk about, from the concept of duality, we talk about dukkha and the self. Then we talk about the greed, hatred, and delusions, which are now being institutionalized, being part of the social problem now. Then now we look at the Buddhist solution. What would be the Buddhist solution? Talking about dukkha is not good enough. We need to, the third and the fourth noble truth, that is, we need to find the path to it. So we need an alternative vision and the path to it. Okay, this is the approach of the approach of the Four Noble Truths. Okay. Interestingly, Nibbana is intentionally vague and is defined in its negatives. So also for social dukkha, to envision a society without institutionalized greed, hatred, and delusion. So, our Buddhist solution is to envision a society without institutionalized greed, hatred, and delusions. Mind you, greed, hatred, and delusion have always been in our human society, but it is not institutionalized in the way that is happening nowadays. In the ancient societies, you also have greed, hatred, and delusions, but they were not so institutionalized and not so rampant. Okay. When David Lloyd mentioned about Nibbana is intentionally vague and defined in the negative, and actually I realized that this is also the Buddhist concept of non-duality, because we are not talking about good and bad. For example, we talk about action, we talk about wholesome and unwholesome, but we are not talking about bad action or good or bad action or good action, but wholesome action and unwholesome action. It's just like light. There's a degree of brightness, but darkness, there's no degree of darkness. Darkness means darkness. When there's no light, there's darkness. So we say darkness is actually the absence of light. Darkness is actually the absence of light. Okay. So same thing, Nibbana is the absence of greed, hatred, and delusion. Okay? Now, in their place, what we might call a Dharmic society would have institutions encouraging their positive counterpart. So we would like to have in our vision a society without institutionalized greed and hatred and delusion. And we want to have a Dharmic society whereby the institutions encourage positive qualities like generosity and compassion, grounded in wisdom that recognize our interconnectedness. Okay, so far so good, but the approach does not take us very far. The question now is a reform capitalism consistent with a Dharmic society? Can we say if you reform capitalist society that we live in today, is it a Dharmic society, or we need altogether different kind of economic institutions? And this is happening in Islam. Islam is proposing their own economic institutions, their own banking system, their own financial institutions, and so on and so forth. When you come to Malaysia, you would know we have Islamic bank, Islamic insurance, Islamic market, everything Islamic. They try to institute a kind of institutions based on their own teachings. So we also have to pose a question: is it a reform capitalist society? Is it a reform capitalist society? Is it a Dharmic society? Or do we need altogether a different kind of institutions? Can representative democracy be revitalized by stricter controls on campaigns and lobbying? I mean, we are talking about present representative democracy, like your presidential election now. Is it good enough just to revitalize by stricter controls on campaigns and lobbying? Or do we require a more participatory, decentralized political system, another alternative political system? And this again, you can see in Islam, in my country, where political parties are day in and some political parties are day in and day out asking to build Islamic state, where they use Islamic laws and things like that. Now, so these are questions that we need to ask, okay? So, unfortunately, David Lloyd admitted, I do not think that Buddhism has the answer to this question. That is not because Buddhism is lacking something it should have, or I do not know that any other religion or ideology has the answer either. Well, he's right. So I don't think that any other religion can offer directly an answer, even though the attempt by Islam in my countries to answer some of these issues, actually none could escape from the capitalist system that we are still in now. They also have a lot of problems that they need to settle. So there is no magic formula to be invoked. The solutions are to be found and not are to be found. They are to be worked out together. Okay. So it's very interesting here that he say the solutions are to be worked out together. And this is what I always stress to a lot of my friends. The road is something that we have to walk on, and the roads appear. The road is not something that we just keep on pointing the directions. The roads would not appear by us pointing. It has to appear by us walking on it. Now, this is a challenging task, but not an insuperable one. If men and women of goodwill can find a way to work together without the deformation of special groups defending special privileges. Needless to say, however, that is not an easy condition to achieve, and remind us of the transformative role of personal spirituality, which helps to develop men and women of goodwill. So you need men of goodwill, men and women of goodwill. But the men of women of goodwill, we need them to go through the transformative role of the personal spirituality, meaning to say personal spirit development. But what can Buddhism contribute to the development of solutions? So, without giving the direct answer, David Lloyd would like to propose three Buddhist implications for us to follow. But I think it's already 1 hour. Perhaps we'll take a rest and we come back and continue. I think this stuff may be too heavy, so better to take a rest. Then we come back 15 minutes time.
Sure.
Yes.
Okay, we'll continue. All right, we'll continue. We were talking about first the social issues. The root cause was identified as a dukkha, which was linked to the concept of self and three evil roots of greed, hatred, and delusion. Then, to solve this, we need a Buddhist solution. And this is where we were just now when we're talking about Buddhist solutions. Because when we just talk about problem, that's not good enough. We talk about Buddhist solution. And our Buddhist solution is to envision a dharmic society whereby the institutions do not encourage greed, hatred, and delusion, but instead encourage generosity, compassion, grounded in wisdom and interconnectedness. Well, that sounds good, but the next question would arise. The next few questions arise whether that kind of society, is it by modifying the existing society, or are we going for a completely new alternative society? So the answer is actually we do not have the answer. There's no magic formula, but the first thing we need to do is we must build up men and women of goodwill, men or women with personal spiritual development, which would help us to develop to realize this vision. But anyway, David Lloyd continues to suggest that there are three things that Buddhists can suggest to develop these solutions. Number one is the importance of personal practice. The basis of Buddhist practice is the obvious need to work on oneself as well as on the social system. If we have not begun to transform our own greed, ill will, and delusion, our efforts to address their institutionalized forms are likely to be useless or worse. Okay, so what he was trying to say, the first thing is, before we talk about what I call institutional changes, let's begin with our own personal practice. Okay, if we can, we are not on the path of reducing our greed, hate, evil, and illusion, then our path of addressing institutionalized reform would be quite useless or worse. So this is the first thing. The second thing is a commitment to non-violence. This is the inseparable means and ends. Peace in every step. Peace in every step is a slogan used by Thich Nhat Hanh, that you must not force peace, but try to have peace in every step. And number three is to awakening together. Our social engagement is not about sacrificing our own happiness to help unfortunate others who are suffering. This would just reinforce our self-exhausting dualism between us and them. Rather, we join together to improve the situation for all of us. So we must not view our helping others as like we are the Christmas father, trying to do charity to others and treating others as others, and we ourselves as someone who is better to help others. That will continue to reinforce ourselves, and must together improve together. And so these were the three Buddhist solutions he proposed. Then finally he proposed that the 5 precepts as a specific plans of actions. In whatever we do, we can refer to the 5 precepts as our basic plan of actions. So these 5 basic actions in the plan were identified as the 5 mindfulness training in Thich Nhat Hanh's system. And just to share with you also, there's a thing called global ethics proposed by the Christian father, scholar, Han Kung, German. He came to Malaysia also, sat in the same forum with me. Global ethics, he talked about global ethics. And he proposed a global ethics sometimes in 1980 something and was accepted by all religions. And you will find that in the global ethics, the first 4 of the global ethics actually corresponds with the first 4 of the Buddhist 5 precepts. So in a way, we are not alone. There are already people who are talking about using the 5 precepts, or at least the first 4 precepts, as the basic underlying principles of action. So now I would like to summarize what we discussed so far in the 1 hour or so in the past. We begin with the emphasis on the social dukkha promoted by ego self, as well as the ego self. So we look at the social problem as a kind of social dukkha. Okay? Ours is personal dukkha. The social problems are social dukkha and is promoted by ego or ego. Okay, just the duality of self and non-self. And the 3 collective poisons of institutionalized greed, institutionalized ill will, and institutionalized delusions. So these institutionalized greed, hatred, and delusions is making our world worse. And therefore, next thing is the importance of personal spiritual practice, commitment to non-violence, and the realization that ending of one's own dukkha requires us to address the dukkha of others as well. Okay, because just now we just mentioned only what we call the three points mentioned just now. We need to emphasize on our own spiritual practice. We need commitment to non-violence, and we need to awaken together. And then finally, the traditional 5 precepts, understood in the modern term, in social terms, give us specific guidelines that point towards the kind of society we are trying to create, as well as provide us with a framework to follow as we search for ways to challenge the present social order. So, general comment here. David Lloyd's doctrinal basis, I put it quote unquote doctrinal basis of socially engaged Buddhism is actually a cultural awakening. What he has mentioned here does not amount to any distinct social program. There's no mention of any specific way of or specific program of actions. This is unlike Islam, where they will tell you the bank must be like this, the insurance must be like this, okay? There should be no interest, things like that. So there is and politics must be like this. It's dictated exactly what to be done. But here we are more of a mental and cultural awakening, beginning with our own self. Okay? And this is a socially awakened Buddhism. A socially awakened Buddhism can play an important role in making the global peace and justice movements more spiritually aware. So these are the general comments. So I have shared with you now, so far, the so-called doctrinal basis of socially engaged Buddhism. There are a few other scholars who came up with their own arguments or presentations on the same subject, but I would not be able to share with you all because one is more than enough. And in fact, if you take 10 scholars, you may have end up with 10, 11 ideas, and you are not doing a PhD now, so you don't need that. If you are doing a PhD, then perhaps you have to look at 2 or 3 or 10 concepts of or doctrinal arguments on socially engaged Buddhism. So now just one is enough. Okay. Now, still on socially engaged Buddhism. Now, since we are coming to the end of this course, I would like to also share some other information. The Buddha as a social reformer. Socially engaged Buddhists like to always refer to the Buddha as an example. And they were not wrong. And in many ways, the Buddha was a reformer. So we call him a foremost social reformer in human history. Whether we use the word reformation or revival or transformation or renaissance, etc., in Buddhism is only just one word: change, anicca. Okay? Things will change. Things are not constant. Things will change. So, in society is also the same. Societies will change, and therefore we need to change. But in this case, it's not the anicca that what I call it transiency, but it's a positive change that we want to bring about. And in fact, the law of impermanence offers us hope. Many Buddhists tend to think that anicca means something passive. Looking at things and say, well, it's not constant, it's only temporary. Then we feel disheartened. But actually, anicca means there's a possibility of improvement. There's something good can happen. So anicca offers us hope. Now, when we look at the Buddha, traditionally, you look at the Buddha images. All the Buddha images were either sitting down or sleeping, or we call the Mahaparinibbana posture. People call it sleeping Buddha. There was once I attended conference in Sri Lanka, and there was a professor of education from Sri Lanka. He told the audience that many Buddhists like the idea of putting the Buddha image as sitting down, meditating, with the eyes up closed or closed, or sleeping. Actually, it's very bad educational psychology. Very bad education psychology, because that imply idleness, passiveness, doing nothing. So he said, actually, the Buddha did not all the time sit down meditating, and did not all the time lying down. In fact, the Buddha got many other postures. And these are many other postures that you can see the Buddha. He has got many other postures. But because traditionally we like the idea of the Buddha being a representation of peace, so we put him in a very peaceful manner, sitting down cross-legged. But to the children, why is the Buddha doing nothing? So there are some walking Buddha statues. Now you go to Bangkok now, there's a very famous Buddha Manthon statue, walking Buddha. And you go to Nagpur in India, they also have a Buddha walking. And if you go to Mandalay in Myanmar, you have the Buddha, one hand holding his robe, the other hand pointing to the sea. He was saying that all the monks who have entered into the monkhood are just like the rivers that have the river waters that have flown into the sea. They are all having the same taste as in the sea, pointing to the sea. So this statue shows that actually we must not mistaken that the Buddha was sitting down most of the time or sleeping. He actually walked more. Okay? Otherwise, he would not be able to cover that big piece of land in India. So I would like to share with you in a summary of what the Buddha has done to reform the society at that time, his social engagement. Number one, from denying God, from external salvation to self-salvation. So you see wreligious talk in India at that time. Practically every religion is talking about salvation through God or Brahma or whatever. It was the Buddha who said you have to depend on yourself for salvation, which is actually is quite challenging to some people, because people normally like somebody else. Bertrand Russell said we like to have a big brother to look after us, to make life easy for us. Bertrand Russell, British philosopher. Then, in terms of religious thought, he was one of the first to deny God determinism or karma determinism and random determinism and go for cause and effect. This is a great change to the religious thought in India at that time and even until today. Then, in terms of equality, in the religious thought, everyone can attain Buddhahood. But in other religions, no matter how, you cannot become God. You can only enter into the kingdom of God by the side of God or be children of God. You can never become God. But in Buddhism, the Buddha says everyone can attain Buddhahood. So a kind of equality. Then, wait for next life, you immediately experiencing Santitiko. So that's why we say one of the virtues of the Dhamma is Santitiko. Because when you meditate, some calmness can come in. You can immediately experience. If you practice dana, some kind of happiness can come in. You can immediately experience. If you practice sila, you can experience some kind of peace and happiness, that you are not harming anybody and you yourself will not be harmed. So it's an immediately experiencing. You don't have to talk about the big ideas of Nibbana for the time being, but little experiences we can gain from practicing the Dhamma. We don't have to wait until next life, because many other religions promise you heaven in the next life, but they never promise you heaven now, but only in the next life. And perhaps the greatest teaching of all time is his teaching on no self, anatta. People were talking about self, reinforcing the self, and he was the first one to talk about no self or anatta. This was, in fact, the greatest teaching of all time. And if you have the time, please read the book by Wapado Rapula on what the Buddha taught, in which he has a good explanation on this concept of no self in only a couple of pages. Okay. And then in terms of religious practices, just now we were talking about religious thoughts. Now we are talking about religious practices. In India at that time, like in any other countries, slaughtering animals for animal sacrifices, slaughtering animal sacrifices was the practice. And the Buddha actually objected to animal sacrifices very much. And with his objections, no animal sacrifices were allowed in Buddhism. And in fact, one of the common practices even until today is fire worship, Zoroastrianism, or fire worshippers. They believe that fire will burn away all your sins. Fire will burn away a lot of things. So they perform fire worshippers. So there were 3 Kassapa brothers staying in Uruvelu Kassapa. So the Buddha came over to his place, and then the Buddha said, can I take lodge a night in your place here? Those days, people of different regions, you can lodge in each other's places without problem. So he asked Uruvelu Kassapa, can I stay in your place? Uruvelu Kassapa said, well, I don't have a comfortable place for you, but in my kitchen, you can stay there, but I mind you, there's a big serpent there that will attack people. Then the Buddha said, oh, all right, I would like to stay there. So the Buddha stayed inside the kitchen. And at night, the serpent came. The serpent king was well known, so there was nobody there to go to the kitchen at night. But serpent king came at night. He was very annoyed seeing the Buddha sitting down there meditating. So he came out with fire, attacked the Buddha. He tried to frighten the Buddha. But the Buddha, through his meditative metta, subdued the serpent, and the serpent arms bone. So the next morning, Uruvelu Kassapa thought the Buddha might be dead by now. Well, he purposely make him go into the kitchen actually, because he has got 500 disciples by himself, and he is the head of a fire worshipper. So he purposely asked the Buddha to go into the kitchen. So he thought the Buddha would be dead by then. But he was surprised to find the Buddha came out of the kitchen safe and sound, and carrying in his bowl and the serpent. So from then on, he respected the Buddha, and the Buddha preached to him. Then he converted to become the Buddha's disciple, together with his 500 disciples. Thereafter, he destroyed all his equipments for fire worship. And since he was at the upper side of the river, all those things would flow down to the middle of the middle way of the river, and eventually to the end of the river. And in the middle way of the river was the second brother of the Kassapa, and at the very end was his third brother, also fire worshippers leader, with 300 and 200 disciples each. So when they saw all the fire disciples, all the fire burning equipment floated along the river, they thought something might have gone wrong with their elder brothers. So they came upstream to see their elder brothers. So when they met the Buddha, they also converted to the Buddha. So altogether, they were 1,000 followers who follow the Buddha. Now, this story shows that the Buddha actually reformed this fire worship at that time, so that the people do not worship fire, and instead he said, and in fact later on he preached a sermon called a fire sermon. So from here we come to know that the Buddha tried to tell people not to practice rituals as a way of salvation, but cultivation of the mind. Unfortunately, today there are still many Buddhists who are still practicing fire worship. Okay? And then, in terms of religious practices, in those days you need the Brahmins to conduct all the rituals. Well, through self-cultivation, you cultivate yourself. You don't need Brahmins to help you. Okay? And you use self-realizations to replace speculations. You do not need to you do not need to rely on your speculations, but through your own practice you can realize certain things. You don't have to speculate and see this and see that. Okay. Another one is the social reform, dismantling caste system. This one I have already told you yesterday or a few days ago, and this is another social reform by the Buddha. Why my screen is not moving? Okay. Okay, another social reform is to uplift the status of women. So, when in Buddhism, the Buddha says everyone can attain Buddhahood, that leads to the establishment of the Bhikkhuni order, we have discussed. It uplifts the status of the woman because actually by entering the Bhikkhuni order, you have the privilege of able to learn something. Otherwise, women in those days, with no birth control, they would have to bear about 10 children in their lifetime, 10 to 20 children in their lifetime, and have to cook and do housework for the family. They would confine themselves completely in the kitchen or in the household throughout their life. But by becoming bhikkhunis, they actually have the opportunity of education and uplift their own status. When King Pasenani, when his wife, Queen Malika, delivered a baby girl, he was a bit upset. Like everybody else in those days, they would like to have a boy. But the Buddha actually consoled King Pasenani. A girl well brought up may be better than a boy. See? Okay? And a woman was superior to a man if she was clever, virtuous, well-behaved, and fruitful and faithful. Then she could become the wife of a great king and give birth to an almighty ruler. So from here we notice that the Buddha assures of women and uplift their status by the establishment of the Bhikkhuni order. Another thing I would like to share with you is education reform by the Buddha. The Buddha was an educator par excellence because he provided education for all. He said, all those who have ears may hear. Okay, you must understand in the Hinduism or Brahmanism at that time, only the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas can hear something. The lower castes were not allowed to hear. In fact, the sutras were banned, not allowed to hear religious teachings, not allowed to read religious texts, or hear more relevant, not allowed to hear people talking about religious issues or religious matters. Whereas the Buddha, by admitting people from all castes into his Sangha, actually he opened up educational opportunity for everyone. And he taught them according to the mentality, according to the event, and that approach of education actually influenced early education in Asia, particularly Sri Lanka, Myanmar, and Southeast Asia. Today, we don't have time to talk about this in details. Suffice to say, his teaching methods actually provided a lot of models and techniques which are used later. Then, we also notice not only the Buddha was an educator par excellence, he actually established the Sangha as a body of learning. So the Sangha actually, if you want to be learned, you want to learn something, you better enter the Sangha, because the Sangha was a body of learning. And monasteries were center of education. By now you would have known that Vikramasila, Nalanda, Odantapuri, a lot of big monasteries, they were all centers of education. And you also have a monastery as center of education even in Sumatra. And the Dharma propagation is also an education process. When throughout history, the Dharma is propagated as an education process, where through an education process, people come and learn the Dharma by educating themselves, and the teachers transfer the knowledge by educating the listeners. So, having said all these things, you notice that the Buddha was in fact a great reformer himself. But this went unnoticed to some people, mainly because the Buddha was also a great religious teacher, and so his achievement as a religious teacher overshine some of these aspects. Now, when you look at this, what are the main characteristics of the Buddha's reformation? Number one is peaceful reformation. The Buddha made a lot of social reform peacefully, without inviting violence or incurring violence to either his own himself, his Sangha, or to the other parties. So, for example, the caste system. Without telling other people that you must abolish caste system, he just admitted some people, some lower caste people, into his own Sangha to show an example. This is the way I'm doing. So, the other parties can complain, can be agitated. Like I said, non-violence doesn't mean that no agitation. You can be agitated, you can think about it to search your own conscience. So that was how the Buddha brought about this kind of peaceful reformation. So even for the formation of the Bhikkhuni, my own personal opinion is that he had instituted some measures so that that reformation will be carried out smoothly without much hindrances from the patriarchal society of that time. And he handled with a lot of wisdom and skill. For example, earlier you notice that he settled the disputes and he gave disputes among the Sakyas and the Koreans, and he also handled the King Vadidabu by sitting down under in the middle of the road to obstruct his his army advancing into the Sakya kingdoms and so on. So all this was the wisdom that he used, and he also involved in inter-religious dialogues. In India at that time, it was quite common for people of various religions, religious leaders of various religions, to talk to each other in a very frank manner, and even to argue and debate and things like that. And for example, the Buddha went to the Kassapa brothers, the stories that I have narrated to you just now. In a way, it was a kind of inter-religious dialogue, inter-religious interactions. Purposely go and stay in his place and reform him. Okay. So now we look at just now I shared with you what you call the Buddha as a reformer. Okay. Now I would like to share with you contemporary issues of engaged Buddhism. You know, when we talk about social issues, there are actually so many social issues. But I can briefly show you some of the issues that I would call it contemporary or current issues. Number one is inter-religious relationship. This is particularly true in Southeast Asia now. Southeast Asia, we have 47% Muslim, 42% non-Muslims, equal number, more or less equal percentage. But there are Buddhists are minorities in a number of countries, and Muslims are also minorities in a number of countries. And religious conflicts in those areas would give rise to certain not only social problems but economical and political problems. So this is a kind of issue that we have to deal with. And then you have the world peace problem. Today there are still wars here and there. We do not know when wars will be over. Then globalization. This is a big issue. If we want to talk about globalization, actually, I have a lot to talk about. We have economic globalization, cultural globalization, political globalization, transnational Buddhist organizations, and so on. So there are a lot of issues related to this, which some Buddhist organizations are dealing with it. And of course, the very current issue is gender inclusiveness now. We are talking about equality for male and female, and we are also talking about the position or the rights of the LGBT. And then we'll talk about capital punishment. This is another issue. Do you know that most Buddhist majority countries, except Cambodia, practically all Buddhist majority countries except Cambodia have capital punishment. So this is also another issue. If we have time, I would like to share with you this topic, which was debated in Malaysia recently, or rather about a year ago. Now quiet down a little bit because of COVID-19. And then, of course, poverty and economy. This is again issues that have been taken up. And then quality education, mindfulness, and then environmentalism. We talk about issues of corporate social conscience or corporate social responsibility, and then the pattern of consumptions and things like that. So there are indeed many social issues that if we want to deal, really we have a lot of issues to deal with. Okay. Trying to move my screen, why the screen doesn't move? Okay, I will show you one more last slide on the socially engaged Buddhism. Socially engaged Buddhism is not without problem. In fact, we have some problems, and I have listed here 3 problems. Number one, on the same social issue, Buddhists together are unable to reach consensus. I mean, we are unable to reach consensus even among Buddhists. Well, you talk about no greed, no hatred, no delusion. All of us still have greed, hatred, and delusion. So when we still see things in all different perspectives and not able to arrive at a certain conclusion, that would be one of the major problems. Even on capital punishment, I tell you, Buddhists are divided. Some Buddhist leaders advocated that we should abolish capital punishment or death penalty. Some Buddhist leaders say, no, 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 no. We should not abolish capital punishment. So you can think about it. Later we can debate about it if we want. This is a socially engaged issue. And then this is just an example. Even on the, let's say, the position of LGBT, there are also controversies that among Buddhists, we cannot even achieve consensus. So when we are, and then the political issues, for example, the political issues in Sri Lanka. So some monks take part in politics, and while some other monks will condemn them for taking part in politics. So we are not able to arrive at consensus. So, and then on the same issues, sometimes we have the so-called lag. For example, in Thailand, when they were trying to amend the constitution, there were some people who said we must maintain Buddhism as the religion of Thailand, as like a state religion, the religion of the Kingdom of Thailand. So this one, they say, is very right, okay, right. Then you have some like Sulak Sivalaksa, who claim that we should separate religion and the state. State and religion must not mix two things together. We should not put in the constitution that Buddhism is a national religion. We respect the rights of every religion. So that is a leftist attitude. So you have left and right. Same thing for in Sri Lanka. Some find that some will say that we need to protect the rights of Buddhists now. Therefore, we should not allow this what I call Middle East countries to come in and call countries and buy so many properties and then convert them to become mosques. Well, then they say this is rightist, the rightist attitude. Well, the leftists say, well, this is a free world, this is a free religion, this is a freedom of religion. If they want to come in, let them come in. It's a left. Okay? Well, some people may compromise and become sector. Okay, and even the left, you have some. The left supposed to be, we call it radical. Okay, but then sometimes you have the conservative radical. Okay, so you have so many things. Is there any way out? This is a question. I discussed this matter with a number of scholars on this, and my simple conclusion is actually we don't have to find a way out yet. If we cannot arrive at a consensus at this point of time, we just need to continue our debate. We just need to each walk our own way. If in Taiwan you think that you can approve LGBT, you go your way. But in Malaysia, if I cannot agree, I will go my way. But continuous dialogue between us will continue. And through this continuous dialogue, we may eventually arrive at a consensus. And a consensus may not be required now. A consensus may not be required at a later stage. But we keep the dialogue open. Okay, so my approach is we must understand that to arrive at consensus is very difficult. But it is not impossible, and yet it is also not very desirable. So not necessarily you must arrive at consensus. You can each take your own way. Okay. And then we have another problem. Others do not share what you think and believe in. So now Buddhists talk about greed, hatred, and delusion. We must remove this. We must practice generosity and things like that. Then come an army that come here and burn down your mosques, burn down your temples or riots and things like that. Pointless. So, well, this is a paradox that you have to face. If you do not advocate violence, then you do not return to the violence. So it is a matter of, I say, civilization and violence. These are two forces that are trying to challenge each other. This is a problem that we have to face, and we may have to continue to face. No solution in sight. And the third problem we have is when you want to be socially engaged, I tell you, there are so many issues. So which issue you want to take up? Okay. Well, later on when I talk about Buddhism, ethics in Buddhist, ethics in political participation, then I will take you with this slightly. Okay. So now I think it's time we take a rest. Then we continue later. Now it's 10:30. Okay. All right, are we back? Okay, we can carry on.
Sure.
Now we are at the last chapter. Just now was chapter 18, which I could carry forward. Now I go back to chapter 17, ethics of political engagement. Like it or not, socially engaged Buddhism has a lot to do with political engagement, because practically all social issues would eventually have something to do with politics. That is the pattern of the present world today. So now we would like to look at the ethics of political engagement. Now in humanistic Buddhism, we emphasize on social engagement, and political institution in contemporary society is an important institution which affect our lives. Like it or not, it will affect our life in one way or another. So in this aspect, there are a few issues here. Number one is, can lay Buddhists engage in politics? I think this is a less controversial issue. If lay Buddhists cannot engage in politics, then what happened to all those countries with majority lay Buddhists? I mean, with majority Buddhists, who is going to run politics? Who is going to run the countries? So this is not an issue at all. In most cases, it's not an issue at all. Lay Buddhists can always engage in politics. So this is not an issue that we would like to discuss. But there is a second issue. Can monastics, can monks or nuns as individuals participate in politics? This is the one that we already discussed in one of our lectures of individual monks. By themselves, they would like to be involved in politics. So this is the one that we have already discussed. But now there is another issue here. Can Buddhist organizations, as an organization, now we are talking about not as an individual, but as an organization, participate in politics or engage in politics? Now, as an organization, it can be an organization where members are all monks, which means it's a, in the traditional term, it's called a sangha. But nowadays, in the modern world, in certain countries, you register an organizations where all the members are monks, but you call it an association. Okay. So the question is, can Buddhist organizations, whether it's purely laymen or purely monks, or a mixture of monks and laymen, can they participate in politics? This is the question. So now, if you look at the figures that I have shown you earlier, Uttama of Myanmar, on his own, he was actively engaged in politics. Venerable Dr. Rana, on his own, actively participated in politics and even formed a political party and became a joint secretary. Thich Nhat Hanh, on his own, but with the support from his community of Sangha, was involved in the anti-Catholic regime as well as anti-war. So in a way, he also participated in politics. And then Tai Shi, although Tai Shi advocated that monks can be involved in the policy matters of politics, but not to engage in the pursuit of power. He himself actually was not active in politics, but his viewpoint was such that monks can be involved in politics to a certain extent. And of course, this man is a politician anyway. So now, the question now is not so much of whether Buddhist organizations can or cannot participate in politics, or rather the question is, how can they participate in politics? How can they do it? Okay? So now, before we answer these questions, we need to know what does political engagement mean. Okay. Now, first, political engagement may be divided into two levels. One is to enter into the seats of power, where you go for the pursuit of power. And in a modern democracy means you fight for a post as a member of parliament or as a representative of the common people. Okay. And the other one is to exercise the rights of a citizen involved in the decision making of public policies. In a democracy, we are given the rights to be involved in the decision making of public policies. So whether you agree or not with the public policy, for example, if there's a public policy forbidding sale of alcohol, do you agree or not? If Buddhism does not agree, or if the Buddhist community do not agree, do we protest, or do we just keep quiet? So we are allowed to be involved in the decision making of the public policies. For example, many public policies nowadays that affect every aspect of our life. For example, COVID-19 now says when you go out of your house in the public places, you must wear a mask. It's a public policy. But in a democracy, we can voice our opinions, whether we agree or not agree. Or we can even lobby people to go against this law or support this law. So there are two levels. One is to exercise of to enter into the seats of power. The other one is to exercise the citizenry right. Okay. Now, Buddhist organization actually is a corporate citizen. But we individuals are citizens. But when we form together, we form a corporation. That corporation or that association organization then becomes a corporate citizen. And as a corporate citizen, if we shun away from politics, it's just like an individual citizen. We choose not to go and vote. We choose not to voice our opinions on any policies. Then we are actually marginalizing ourselves in a democracy. And that will not be wise for the Buddhists to do so. However, then we need to engage ourselves in public policies. But when we want to engage in politics, then we have two problems, two challenges to face. Number one, it would lead to deviation from the original vision, mission, and objective of our organizations. When you form a Buddhist organization, it's always very clear that a Buddhist organization, the vision is something like to establish a Dharmic society, and our mission is to bring happiness to people. Our objective would be to propagate the Dhamma, to teach people mindfulness, to practice compassion and things like that. And if we are to be engaged in politics, then we tend to deviate from this original objective. Because basically, the vision, mission, and objectives of political activities are very much different from the vision, mission, and objectives of Buddhist organizations. We say politics has a lot to do with distribution of resources. Politics has a lot to do with distribution of resources. Financial resources, material resources, where to tax, how to distribute the tax and things like that. How to collect revenues, where to put the revenues to good use and things like that. Religion is on placement of values. Religions emphasize a lot on values. What sort of values? For example, in Buddhism, we talk about compassion, wisdom, we talk about dana, all these are our values. And we talk about placement of values means which values we cherish more. For example, in Islam, they talk about mercy, and in Christians, they talk about love. So, if we are to be involved in the political activities, we we face a danger of deviating from this original vision. That's one challenge. Number two challenge is possibility of disintegration and losing the role as a middle ground. Because when we are involved in political activities, somehow all political activities are divisive in nature, divisive. They tend to divide people because even in your country now, you have about 50% Republican, 50% Democrats. So the country is divided into half, but you have a consensus. You are all Americans. That's fine. Okay, but in certain countries, when these divisions can become so serious that in my country here, you have the Islamic parties. The politics is such that the Islamic community sometimes are so divided that they won't go to the same mosque because of political divisions. So once you are engaged in politics, then you have this possibility of disintegration. And actually, a religion play a very important role in bringing cohesion and harmony to a society by providing the middle ground or playing the role of the middle ground. So like the Buddha was the middle ground for the Sakya and the Koreans who were about to go to war. So the Buddha, being the middle ground, was able to mediate. Now suppose in our community, even the religion itself, even the temples or the Buddhist organizations take sides, then there's a possibility of disintegration. So if we don't want to participate in politics, then we shun away from politics. Then in a democracy, we marginalize ourselves, and this will be to our disadvantage. We are like back to monarchy where we let the rulers decide for ourselves. Then, but if we were to be engaged in politics, then we have a bigger trouble because it can lead to deviation from our original objective and the possibility of losing our middle ground. Therefore, we need a code of ethics. Okay, meaning to say we need to know how to participate in politics. It's not a matter of whether we should or should not participate in politics, but a matter of how we should participate in politics. So, on these issues, ethics to be proposed by Thich Nhat Hanh. Thich Nhat Hanh has a 14-point mindfulness. In his 14-point mindfulness, one of the mindfulness mentioned about political engagement, and this could be construed as the the ethics for political engagement. Number one, do not use the Buddhist organization for personal gain or profit. This is what he said. So my comment is, this is a conscience-based ethic. It asks you whether you are doing all these things for personal gain or not. So for example, for those monks who are contesting for member of parliament and some of them become member of parliament, they should ask themselves, I'm doing all these things. Am I doing all these things so that I have some personal gain or profit? Now I say this is a conscious space because actually gain or profit sometimes is difficult to be known or measured, because gain can be in terms of fame, in terms of intangible values, and of course the profit can be in terms of tangible but may not be known to people. Many politicians today are ultra rich, richer than many people, and many people find that politician is one of the best occupation now in terms of making money. So this is a conscience base. Ask ourselves. It's very difficult for people to know whether you are doing this for gain or profit or for for empathy to the bigger community? We do not know, but this is the conscience-based ethics. Number two, Tinanhan says, do not transform your organization into a political party. Now this is a little bit more structured. You know, the nature of political parties and the nature of Buddhist organizations are very much different. So if you more or less make your organization to become like a political party, then you are inviting more problems, because political parties, the nature of political parties and the nature of the Buddhist organizations are different, as I mentioned earlier. And therefore, the vision and mission and the objectives of Buddhist organization would be compromised. Okay? And in fact, by doing so, which has happened to a lot of Muslim political parties or political Islam, you will notice that they tend to advocate a theological state, a state where the religion is the highest and the religion has the highest say. But you know, religions cannot speak. God also cannot speak. It is those followers who claim to be the spokesman for God or a spokesman for religion that speaks, and they would manipulate for their own ends. Okay, so the third ethics is a religious organization should make clear stance against oppression and justice. So focus should be against oppression and injustice. But this one also has got a little bit of problem, you know. Sometimes what you see as oppression may not be oppression. What you see as injustice may not be seen as injustice by other people. So this is a problem that I mentioned to you just now. When we were talking about in my previous lecture before we paused. Sometimes we cannot come to the similar conclusion. Then, number 4, and should strive to change the situation without engaging in partisan conflicts. Therefore, we should try to make changes without taking sides in politics. So this is actually a test of wisdom and skill. How to do it without taking sides is actually a test of skill. Well, like in my countries, well, if the things that we like to protest, most of the time the opposition party also protests. So when we protest, then we are seen to be on the side of the opposition. That you can't avoid. But the point is, we do not want to be to say that we are supporting this party against the government's proposal, or we are supporting the government against the opposition's point of view. So we need to use a lot of wisdom so that we are not seen to be partitions. So as far as the examples that I gave you earlier on the Young Buddhist Association of Malaysia, the Malaysian context, we have been treading the path pretty well without being seen to be in any side of any political parties, because we always focus on issues and the topic or the issues, not regardless of which party supporting or against it. Okay, so we have to be careful. But if we take an example of I say a lack of wisdom and skill in the case of in Taiwan. In the presidential election in Taiwan, I mentioned to you this Zhong Tai-si, Venerable Wei-che. He being a former soldier in the Kuomintang party and ran away from Taiwan, from mainland China to Taiwan. He supported the Kuomintang party during presidential election openly. That, of course, angered the supporters of of the Greek, the other party, the People's Progressive Party, and some of the People's Progressive Party people went and held protests in front of his temple. And then during the what you call the contest between President Ma Ying-jeou and the present President Tsai Ing-wen, Bob Wang San was seen to be supporting Kuomintang, and as I have shared with you, Venerable Xing admitted that he is a member of the Kuomintang, and he was offered certain, or rather, he was given certain titles within the Kuomintang. So this is not, to me, from our, it's not in the best interest of Buddhism, because then you are seen now to be taking sides of the politics, taking sides in partition politics. Okay, so this is what Thich Nhat Hanh mentioned. Then Thich Nhat Hanh mentioned 4, but Professor Yu Xiangzhou of Taiwan is one of those who study quite a lot about socially engaged Buddhism and globalization. He mentioned a few more ethics. He mentioned one more here. Religious leaders should ensure that the resources of an organization are used in accordance with the original objective these resources were obtained. So if you have obtained these resources, telling your members that you want to use this money to build the tallest temple in Taiwan, then you use this money for building that temples. You don't channel your money to some other political parties. So this is a very good ethics, code of ethics proposed by Professor Yu as he fine-tuned rule number 1. Rule number 1 mentioned by Thich Nhat Hanh just mentioned, do not use the organization for personal gain or profit. This is conscious, but Professor Yu fine-tune it. We must not use our Buddhist organization's resources, our building or our money for other purposes. Okay. And number 2, when religious leaders mobilize devotees for certain purposes, that mobilization should not exceed the objects of that faith. Meaning to say, when we want to mobilize our people in support of certain cause, for example, let's say in the case of Taiwan where they say Kuan Yin do not move, we do not want the Kuan Yin to move, then we mobilize our devotees to show our displeasure, then we involve resources, hiring passes and things like that, revolving resources. But that should be only limited to that and should not exceed the objects of that faith. We should not mobilize to at the extent of, say, challenging the government on other issues. Only for these particular issues, for this particular purpose, not for exceeding that. And number 7, religious leaders must not convert the sacredness of the religion to become a field of secular mobilization for political purposes. This is a very good one proposed by Yu Xiangzhou. The religious leaders must not convert the sacredness of the religion to become a field of secular mobilization for political purposes. You see, temples, Buddhist organizations, this is a sacredness of a religion. But if you start mobilizing and convert it for political purposes, thinking that because people respected you, and you actually hijack that sacredness of the religion. This is especially true when that religious leader becomes very influential and powerful. So sometimes religious leaders, I notice especially in political Islam, people have a lot of respect for the religious leaders, and those religious leaders would claim that, well, if you listen to me or you vote for me, it's a vote for God. But if you vote for the other party, it's a vote for the infidels. So you are what I call hijacking the sacredness of your religion. So this is an ethic that warned religious leaders not to hijack religions. But on the other hand, how this could come about is because devotees themselves supported their leaders to do so. So the devotees, that is an ethics for the devotees. The devotees' support and confidence in the religious leaders should always be subject to rational scrutiny. Meaning to say, use your common sense, use your rational thinking, wake up. Don't just blindly follow your leaders. And this is always happening amongst in religious groups, regardless of which religion. People tend to revert or worship their leaders to the extent that they blindly follow. So if a religious leader says, let's vote for so and so, some people actually follow. That would be foolish, isn't it? And if devotees do that, then that leader tends to become very much more confident in repeating what he was doing. Okay? You know, when religious organizations inappropriately engages in partisan politics, a vast majority of its devotees would choose to withdraw themselves. Here, again, is a warning against partisan politics. Because when a large number of devotees choose to withdraw themselves, that means that organizations break up. So the middle ground is lost. Buddhism can no longer play the role of mediation, can no longer play the role of settling conflicts, the role of harmonizing people. So that was the nice proposal from Thich Nhat Hanh and Yu Chang-chong. And in a conference in Bangkok, in the Mahachulalongkorn University, we have this university. The full name is Mahachulalongkorn Viriraya University. Something like that. Got 14 sounds for you to pronounce. So we always shortened it to the Mahachulalongkorn University. In this university, I presented my paper and added 3 more proposals from me. Instead, number 1, which is number 8 here, devotees' support and confidence in the religious leader should always be subject to rational scrutiny. Sorry, this is still Yu Chang-chong, and religious organization. Sorry, I jump to the next one. Okay, further. Give priorities to issues related to Buddhism, or where Buddhist values can contribute. This is what I mentioned earlier under socially engaged Buddhism, that we have a problem. I mentioned 3 problems. Number 3 problem is there are so many issues. Which issues? Therefore, I would say we should give issues in our ethics, we should give priorities to issues related to Buddhism. Or when we think our Buddhist values can contribute the most. Well, some people will say, and this is where Venerable Chow Wei disagreed with me. He said, then in that case, when you are in trouble, nobody will come to you. Then I know I'm very well aware that there is a poem by this Martin Niemöller who said this. First, the Nazis came. They came for the communists, and first the Nazis came. First, they came for the communists, and I did not speak up because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I did not speak up because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak up because I am not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak up because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak up for me. So, with this argument, they said, they counter my argument. But my argument is, no matter how, matter of priorities. We should always, we do not say we do not want to be involved in other issues. But priorities, we can still be involved in other issues, but perhaps in a more limited and a more subdued way. There is no way that you can be involved in so many issues that the societies bring up. And if you keep on involving ourselves, then you will soon lose sight of your original vision and mission of your organization. So we try to bring up issues related to Buddhism or where our values can contribute the most. Then the next thing is Buddhist organizations have its own agenda and issues and not acting as passengers. As socially engaged Buddhists, we must have our own plan. And in our own plan, we come up with our own agenda and our own issues, and not acting as passengers. Nowadays, in many cases, Buddhists are reacting to the situations, and not proactively bringing up our own agenda and issues. This is happening in most socially engaged cases. And even in my countries, practically all the cases were reacting. That's why I suggested that we should be coming up with our own agendas and issues. For example, in my country, nobody talked about animal welfare, whereas this was brought up in Sri Lanka and quite reasonably well dealt with. So we can always bring it up in my country, in Malaysia, because as part of our own agenda. Rather than somebody else is talking about LGBT, and we also jump into LGBT. And when somebody else is talking about gambling, we also jump into gambling. Not that we cannot deal with those issues, but we have to have our own agenda as priority first. And the last one, and perhaps the most important ethical issue here is, we have to make known our identity. We have to have the identity as a citizen over our identity as a Buddhist. In a democracy, especially in a secular country like Malaysia or in a secular democracy, we are participating in politics because of our rights as a citizen, not because of our identity as a Buddhist. Therefore, by participating as a citizen, we must view the idea, view the issues from the lens of a citizen, and not from our own perspective, the self and others perspective of a Buddhist. Well, this may sound a bit challenging, but a few examples may help to clarify this. If you have a Muslim judge sitting in a court, you would like to see him acting as a judge, not acting as a Muslim, right? So same thing, when we participate ourselves in politics, we would like to be seen as a citizen, even though we are Buddhist. Somebody else may be a Christian, somebody else may be a Muslim, but we all like to be seen as citizens. And if our identity as citizens is well established, we don't have to worry about our identity as a Buddhist, because here we are participating as a citizen, not as a Buddhist. After all, this word Buddhist is a label, and like it or not, people would know that you are a Buddhist. So we don't have to champion our cause, citing Buddhist texts to support our case and things like that. But we just have to use our citizenry right, argue the case based on the rights of the citizens. So this is our proposals. So now I come to the concluding part. If Buddhist organizations shun away from politics, then we would marginalize ourselves. Okay. But if we are engaged in politics, then we face the challenges of, number one, we deviate ourselves from our original vision and objective. And we face ourselves with the problem of self-disintegration and losing our role as a middle ground. So, therefore, we need to develop a code of ethics. And therefore, I have shown to you the code of ethics. So Buddhist organizations are civil groups within a civil society with rights to chart the course of the society, but we must do so wisely. So with this, I end my talk here on the ethics of political organization, political participations. We are left with 10 minutes, just nice. So perhaps we can have some discussions, or you have any opinions you would like to talk about, please share with me. Okay. Then the next fortnight, we will be doing revision. If I have time, I will deal with you on the case of silence or any other topic. But perhaps we will concentrate on the revision first, so that all of you will score very well in your examination. So now, question time or discussion time, okay?
I did have a question, sort of for the group as a whole too. Dealing with the political climate, like in the US right now, I'm curious to know how each of you sort of traverse these conversations with either family members, in-laws, different people you can't help but be in contact with, I guess, who support an opposing position politically. It seems like, sort of also too, like in light of Bhikkhu Bodhi's conversation yesterday, because it does seem to be this way, and this has kind of always been the Democrats versus the Republicans, with Republicans have always usually historically had this like aggressive, get things done, backbone, come at you. Democrats seem to kind of like shy away. And even now there's like this right aggressiveness with like, I don't know, argumentation, conversations, bringing things up. I'm just curious how you guys deal with it. Like if you find yourself in a situation where you know you can't change someone's mind at all, you know you're not going to be able to, do you say anything? Do you try to just practice compassion and look at the impermanence and emptiness of things? I mean, and it's easy to say that, but then there's another thing to like actually practice it. I'm just curious what your guys is, you know.
Yeah, we do the same thing. We also debate and argue and fight. We do the same thing. But I think we are mature enough. Fortunately, after 60 years of democratic practices, we are mature enough to respect each other's opinions. In my WhatsApp groups with all my university mates, we used to quarrel with each other and debate and share our opinions, and sometimes crack a few jokes. But I am always very careful not to make it personal, not to have a personal attack on somebody, but just try to focus on certain issues. Sometimes I'm on the side of the government when on certain issues I support the side of the government. I will say I support. My classmate will say no, and they argue with me. Well, no, we just each say our opinion. So I think we must realize that it's difficult to arrive at consensus, especially in a democracy. But we respect, okay, we respect the differences in opinions. And this is how the democratic world works now. And we also do not have to yearn for consensus. It's not necessary to have consensus at times. But of course, sometimes you have to come to a consensus, especially let's say husband and wife arguing whether we should buy a car or not. Well, somebody has to make a decision, or a consensus has to be arrived at. But there are certain political issues or social issues that sometimes people debated for fun. for our intellectual activities in our mind. You don't need a consensus. You don't need a consensus to end the conversation. Okay? Anything else?
Thank you, Dato.
Yeah.
So it's somewhat rhetorical unless you've heard the reasoning behind it, but Buddhist organizations that are for capital punishment.
Yeah,
the first first precept is pretty clear, to not kill living beings. I mean, they may be mentally ill or have some sort of thing going on, but I mean, I don't quite grasp how the death penalty can be on the table in a Buddhist community.
Interesting, but we can actually take a look at that issue, but that will take at least an hour.
That's fair. I was just, it's something I was thinking about after you said it. I was just like, I can't wrap my head around it. The first precept's right there, plain as English, but I don't know. I guess every community is different, but the precept's there.
Yeah, look at Christianity too. I mean, not to point fingers at other religions, but that thou shalt not kill, right? But we do it here too. They'll find a way, to justify whatever they want.
Yeah.
I haven't read Quran, but I'm pretty sure in Quran, probably there's a saying to the same effect, don't kill. But people are killing. So there goes that.
I guess it's one of those instances where it's subject to their interpretation.
No, it's not subject to the interpretation. I mean, religions can say, don't do this, don't do that, for in one way or the other. Eventually, humans end up doing exactly the opposite. So at that point, the question should be, is it the problem with the religion, or is it the problem with I guess to Corey's point, is it the problem with how people interpret it? So people...
No, I do not know. If you go through the Quran, then you probably will find that there are permission to kill. So that does. Then in Buddhism, it's very clear that the first precept is not to kill, including not only human beings but all lives. But in its 2,500 years of history, you notice that wars was still fought, but not over religions. Thailand and Burma used to fight wars for so many years, and Thailand used to fight with Laos, Laos fight with Cambodia. All these neighboring countries were fighting with each other, all Buddhist countries, although they did not fight over religions. So we say bloodshed over religion. We say Buddhism is a very peaceful religion, mainly because bloodshed was not shed in the name of Buddhism, but in the name of politics of those days.
That I agree with.
Yeah.
I have thought about all these. I think the sufferings all come from our greed and aversion and ignorance. So when we come back to the root, actually, we all need to know that we have to spend some time to do the cultivation to develop our mind. And according to Buddha's teachings, the only way to cultivate our mind is to use the meditation. We learn enough lectures, but if we do not meditate to cool down our mind, our thoughts, then we always will have our personal views, as always, right? Then with the personal views, there's no way out, because everyone has their own personal view. Then we ended up fighting each other. So the Buddha taught us the Honeyball Sutra. If we learn that, and then also adding the meditation every day, And so we can have a reflection on our own mind, then we might be able to see things more clearly. So someone like Thich Nhat Hanh is able to tell us exactly in what attitude to deal with the current situation. That's what I felt.
Yeah, good. In fact, to sum up the Buddha's teaching, we always say avoid evils, do good, purify the mind. Sabba papasa akaranam kusalasa upasampanam sachitta pariyodaphanam etam budada sasanam. Now you notice these verses here, avoid evils, do good. These are morals, which are taught in practically every religion. But to purify the mind, this is the hallmark of Buddhism. This is not taught in every religion. And when we talk about purification of the mind, it's about meditation. Because it's only when you meditate, when we start looking into our own mind, when we look inside, then only we realize our own greed, hatred, and delusion, or our greed, aversion, and ignorance. So you are right. You are very right. We need to meditate, or we need to. Actually, the word meditate is not a very good word. Meditate in the Pali word bhavana. Bhavana means development of the mind. Meditation means development of the mind. So when we develop our mind, train our mind, then we'll be able to see things clearer and act out of compassion more naturally. And in fact, there are people who avoid evil, do good, but because the mind is not pure, they think that by killing the non-believers is the right thing to do. Avoid evil, do the good thing, but by killing the non-believers is a good thing, because then they will go to heaven. Because they think that is the way, because that's where we say there's a lack of purification of the mind or the development of the mind. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dado.
Oh, is it time's up now?
Yes,
Oh,
9:30.
okay. All right. So good morning to all of you. Can go for your breakfast now. We come back a fortnight's time. We can have our revision. Okay. How do you want the revision to go through? Maybe maybe we not the format now we are doing. Perhaps I will pose some questions, and you all take turns to answer. Then based on the notes that I have given, that will make your revision more effective.
Sounds good.
So,
Sounds good.
So just go through your notes. I may just pose you a few questions. Maybe perhaps, for example, I ask you Aoyang Chien's 10 points of absurdity. What are the 10 points? And perhaps you can tell us, one of you will volunteer. Then perhaps I ask you about what are the causes for the growth of the Buddhist movement in Taiwan. Then you answer. Okay.
Okay.
That would help you in your revision. Okay.
Okay, we're doing this Friday.
All right. Okay. On the 5th of on the 4th of December for you, and for the 5th of December for me.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. All right.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Okay.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Datu.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dato. Have a good night.
Good, Dato.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank
Good
you.
night.